Okay, we might make a start. I was just waiting to ensure that everybody had made their way from the waiting room into our conversation today. My name is Megan Scott. I'm the Director of the Patient Reported Measures Program at the CEIH. And welcome today to our statewide clinical network conversation series, the topic of which is clinical genomics. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the land that we meet on today is the land of the traditional lands of the Kaurna people, and that we respect their spiritual relationship with their country. We also acknowledge the Kaurna people as the custodians of the Adelaide region, and that their cultural and heritage beliefs are still as important to the living Kaurna people today. I'm going to begin by providing a brief background to the Commission on Excellence and Innovation in Health, we call it the CEIH, and the statewide clinical networks before I hand over to today's presenter. As you can see, our vision at the CEIH is all about creating better healthcare for all South Australians. We are the lead agency for innovation in healthcare in South Australia. The way that we, deliver on our vision is all about bringing consumers, clinicians, and other collaborators together to turn ideas into better healthcare. Our portfolio, our various activities occur across a portfolio of work. Obviously, one of our key areas is in the way that we build partnerships, and that's creating new partnerships or strengthening existing partnerships. And that's very much about shifting the healthcare system and transforming great ideas into actions. Another area of our work is something that I'm very close to as the director of the program, and that's the Patient Reported Measures program, very much about empowering patients to share their experiences of healthcare, as well as assessing patients' quality of life in terms of health outcomes. Another area of work for us is our clinical informatics area, and this is about delivering insights that dramatically impact upon how we deliver healthcare. We also have an innovation team who are very much involved in seeking new perspectives and solutions to various wicked healthcare problems, and they do that through collaborating and creating meaningful and sustainable impact in their projects. And one of our main areas of work is our clinical networks, and obviously we have one of our speakers today here as a representative of those networks. Our networks are groups of healthcare professionals, health service organisations, as well as consumers and carers. And those groups of people all collaborate together to achieve high quality care in a particular clinical area. We also have those networks, sit under a broader panel of strategic committees in terms of our steering committees. Those clinical networks provide strategic oversight by functioning as a strategic committee and are led by either a clinical or a consumer lead. They're very much focused on building connections and a community around that specific area of practice. They work across the continuum of care, so that means they aren't limited to just public health organisations or sectors, and are also able to work within the private and primary healthcare sectors. Really what they do is identify and collaborate to really, resolve those strategic problems with the aim of leading to significant improvement in health outcomes for South Australians. We have 8 clinical networks, and you can see those listed on the screen today. And obviously our representative, Dr. Barnett, is from the Clinical Genomics Network, and that is the theme for today's conversation. In terms of our conversation series, we have a series of these available over the next 8 weeks. They occur on Thursdays at 1 p.m. Congratulations, you've made it on time to today's, but these are also recorded and you can access them online as well. They are running through October and November for the next 8 weeks, as we said, and today's is the second one. And really, as we've said, just giving you a space to explore the work of each network and crucially enable you to have a conversation with that network lead, a direct opportunity to ask your questions of the network lead on the work that they are doing. So in terms of the upcoming conversation series that we do have, we had palliative care last week, very ably conducted by Catherine and Peter, our clinical network leads. Chronic pain is next week, is followed by adolescent, and then you can see the program for the rest of November. You are still able to register for any of those series, so we would encourage you to do so if you haven't already. Just a little bit of housekeeping in terms of today. As you have been notified, we are recording this presentation. However, we will be stopping the recording when we move into question time. So when we're talking about being able to access the presentation, it will be the PowerPoint slides and the associated audio that you will be able to access after the event. Just some standard behaviour expectations around keeping your mics on mute. when we come to question and the answer time, you can use your mic to ask a question directly. You can also use the chat question to post a question. And you can do that while Chris is speaking, or you can do that as we're working our way through Q&A. I'm now going to hand over to our presenter today, who is Dr. Chris Barnett, who is our lead for our statewide clinical genomics network. So welcome, Chris.
Thanks, Megan. I'll just share away here. All right. Thank you, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. This is the second one of these I've given, and it's a lovely opportunity just to explain or communicate further about what we're up to.
Chris, I just wanted to let you know we're seeing your presenter view, so if you could just change your display settings. Thank you.
How's that?
Perfect, thank you, and sorry for interrupting, Chris.
No, thanks for telling me. 2 screens, does me in every time. So that's me. I'm a clinical geneticist at the Women's and Children's Hospital, and I've had the pleasure of working with Tony, who's our network advisor, project manager, who's been with the project from the beginning. And the network, the statewide network, is essentially encompasses people like me, clinical geneticists, but also genetic counsellors, genetic pathologists, scientists, bioinformaticians, industry, private sector, GPs, educators, consumers, medical subspecialists. It's actually a really broad group within medicine. We were in the second 4 clinical networks that were established by the Commission in 2020. I've been in the role from the beginning, which was essentially November 2020, and I've signed on for another year. I have a fantastic steering committee, and really difficult to get a small steering committee when you work in genomics, because it's in so many fields of medicine, and we wanted to make sure that LHNs were represented, medical school represented, SAMRI represented, etc. So we've got a whole lot of good people. We've got some really good consumers. I think we've got 1 or 2 of our consumers online today, which is lovely as well. And we meet regularly to discuss the network's role and projects. The purpose of the Clinical Genomics Statewide Network is to pull together the diverse range of professionals and consumers involved in genomics in South Australia to really better the healthcare of South Australians. We represent the broad range of people and institutions using genomics for healthcare. And it's really important to remember that more and more and more genomics is becoming about disease prevention and treatment, which really broadly is encompassed by the term precision medicine. I'm going to really focus on 3 significant areas of work that we're doing, and I'm going to start with the animated consent and digital pathway for consent and collection of medical information, none of which would have been possible without the role of the Commission, who have been really instrumental in helping me through this, or helping me realise this plan, both from a workforce perspective and also from a funding perspective. So this is something I'm really interested in, and I now know also the hospital is very interested in, which is great. So just let me paint the scene. So genomics consent is what I'm going to be talking about, but you have to imagine that this is applicable to lots of different consent within medicine. So I see children with a range of congenital abnormalities, intellectual disability. They may have subtle clinical signs. They may have really significant clinical signs. You know, this, for example, this little child whose hands are fused together in that way, the fingers fused together, has a craniosynostosis syndrome. We know that that's caused by numerous different genes. We also see people in pregnancy, and this is a pregnant woman whose fetus has got these really big kidneys, and that could be a range of different kidney diseases. We're able to do genetic testing now in just about everybody that we see, because the testing has improved so much. And what happens is often people, see us and they're very invested in getting an answer, understandably, especially people that have waited a long time to see us. So the consent process is often put into the very last minute or 2 of the consult and not done very well. Now, on a national level, a group of geneticists, genetic counsellors from around Australia literally spent 2 years working on a one-page consent form to try and cover off on everything that needs to be covered off without turning it into a terrible process. But there's some big ticket items in here, like this could unveil incorrect paternity, for example. And, again, if you imagine the clinical situation where I've got a family with a child sitting in front of me, nobody can work out what's wrong with the child. And I then go through a consent form with them in the last couple of minutes. Most people just sign it and don't ask questions, which, I've never felt terribly comfortable with. So with the help of the Commission, and an Adelaide-based digital media company, we've actually turned the consent form into an animated consent video. And what I'm going to do now is show you actually about a minute of it, just so you've got the flavour of what we're doing here, and then I'll cut back and talk more about it. Now, I'm hoping this is going to work. Just give us 1 second. Now, someone just needs to put their hand up if they can't hear this. Can everyone see that screen so far? Yep.
Genomic testing. What is it?
Hear it?
And why has your healthcare provider asked you to have it done? Genomics can be used to help find answers to many health conditions relating to children, adults, and even pregnancies. If you have any questions, make sure to ask your healthcare provider. SA Health are here to help you make an informed decision about genomic testing. And don't forget, it's your choice whether to have this test or not. So if you have any doubts or questions, make sure to ask your healthcare provider. So what is genomic testing? Genes are a huge part of what makes you, you. Your entire DNA code.
So I'm just going to cut to a bit further along just so you see the flavour
Stop
of
the
it.
sentence making any sense, while others can change the meaning entirely. It's changes like these which can lead to genetic diseases, as the code no longer works correctly. So what are some of the possible results from your genomic test? We could find a genetic variant that either explains the condition in the person or family, or is likely associated with it. We might not find anything that explains the clinical presentation. We could find a change in your genes we are not sure about. This is called a variant of uncertain significance, VUS. This is a really common result. It might mean something or not.
Okay, so I think you've got the idea. Just 1 second, I've got to get back on screen. Is that back to where it should be?
Yes, thanks, Chris.
No worries. So, as I said, with the Commission's help and money, we were able to make that animation with Design by Motion, or Motion by Design, a company based in Adelaide. And then the next task was, how do we deliver this to families and patients in a useful way? And we've partnered with a company called Personify Care. I saw Guillaume's name online. So hi, Guillaume, who's helped a lot with, he works for Personify, who's helped a lot putting this together. But Personify is essentially a South Australian-based company at Lot 14 who help turn what has traditionally been paper medical communication into digital communication. And it puts some responsibility back on to families and patients in terms of, for example, they need to register themselves. And that can happen as simply as putting in a mobile phone number and inviting a patient to register. And then they receive a formal text from SA Health. And this is what our families see when this happens. They know it's from my department, Women's and Children's Hospital. They then get invited in and they can choose their font size, for example. This is all screenshots of phones. And then they will see something like this. And although we're focused on consent, and this being the delivery mechanism for this consent process, we've also designed for the same, for a whole lot of other purposes, but essentially with the same license fee, a whole lot of other really useful things. So I'm going to get back to the consent in a second. But for example, a simple warm welcome on their phone as the first point of contact with our service is really good. We can also tell them on their phone about the wait list, where they've been prioritised, rather than it being a mystery and people ringing, 10 times to find out, where am I? When am I going to be seen? Am I sort of, within 6 months, within 12, all of that. And a really important thing that we've added in is we send patients now, after receiving a referral, 2 or 3 really critical questions to us on triage. So things like, are you currently pregnant? Because that very much determines whether I see someone urgently or not. So picture a child with a potential genetic disorder, and then the parents are having their second child. We don't know what's wrong with the first child. They could have a 1 in 4 chance of it happening again. And it comes down then to being, a much faster process for seeing us. So that basically, if they answer yes, then they're prompted to tell us how many weeks they are, which is helpful as well, because it's obviously linked to where you are in your pregnancy. But we also always want to know if they've got family members who have seen a genetic service or have a genetic condition, and that's very often not on the referral. And then we have to ring and ask, and now the family can do that in an automated fashion, tell us who the relative is and what the condition is, and that comes back to us for us to see before we've even triaged the referral. Now, the consent is also delivered to their mobile phone at the appropriate time, and obviously usually that's after the appointment. But basically, if I decide as the doctor that I'm going to order a genetic test, then the patient, they just have to say yes, that Dr. Barnett has ordered a test for the child, and then they see that little screen with the video I've just shown you on their phone. They have to say that they've watched the video in its entirety, because it completely explains the consent form point by point, but in an easy language manner. And then, although they actually don't have to watch the whole thing, we know if they haven't watched the whole thing because the metrics from Vimeo will tell us that. So this is partly why we're doing this as a survey, to see, what the uptake is like and what the effectiveness of this is. And then once they've consented, they can sign with their finger on their phone, which is helpful. And once they do that and submit, then that consent form gets uploaded to a dashboard that I can see here at Women's and Children's Hospital, and I know then that they've consented to that test. The pathway in the background looks a bit like this. You can make it what you want to make it, and one of the great things about Personify is we have a lot of control over the content. But we've done some things that are really basic but very helpful, I think, where people will now get sent on the day of the appointment not just a map that can be very confusing, but plain language instructions. So enter via the main entrance, go past the stairs and turn left down the main corridor, go to the end of the corridor and take kangaroo lifts to the 4th floor. Doors to the paediatric clinic are bright green, register at the reception desk 5 minutes, etc. You get the idea. We've also developed a paediatric patient questionnaire, which is essentially a detailed medical history. The sort of questions, in fact, almost exactly the same questions that I would ask in an appointment. So things that people don't remember, like what's birth weight of your child, if I'm seeing them, as a 10-year-old, what was the head circumference, what was the length, and a real sort of detailed 20 to 30 minute background history that we get. So what that now means is when I see a patient, rather than having to go through all of that face to face, I've already got all of those answers in front of me. We still may go through them, but I'm not needing to write it or type it as we go, which is incredibly helpful process and good from coming to a diagnosis perspective. The dashboard looks a little bit like this. I've just shown you a couple of patients and taken out their names, but essentially, for example, if the consent is ready, I see this that says it's ready to go. I can just click on it, get a PDF of it within 5 seconds and link it to EMR or to our database, which is called TrackGene. We're working with the EMR people to make it even more seamless than that. And EMR people are certainly interested in that, as are Personify, but at the moment it's a print and upload process. So that's the animated consent. We're really proud of it. We're a finalist for the SA Health Awards, which are coming up in November, which is wonderful. As I said, we've started using it in the last sort of 6 weeks or so, and the icing on the cake will be how people respond to it. Built into it is a survey of family, patient, individual satisfaction. So we're going to have a lot of data on what people think of the process. I just want to quickly now talk about what's going on in genomics in South Australia in terms of workforce and demand. it really sort of needs to reflect back to 2001. So in 2001, the human genome was published for the first time. So it's a really interesting story that I don't have time to tell, but there was one individual, Venter, who published his own genome, and then the Human Genome Project, which was a massive $4 billion project. This was way, way, way less. Came to the same conclusions. One was published in Science, one was published in Nature on the same day. And basically the Human Genome Project and Venter's individual project led to them being named Time People of the Year. And it really was, 2001, it was thought that this was going to lead quickly to major advances in medicine. But there was a sort of slow trickle up until the human genome was published for the first time. And then there's been this frenzy, not so much in the 10 years afterwards, but in fact, in the most recent 10 years, starting in about 2010. So my job has fundamentally changed completely in the last 10 years, and we're not prepared for it. And I just want to give you one simple example of this. So these two tests, microarray and exome, are now, since 2010, recognised to be the major, to find the cause of intellectual disability or congenital abnormalities more than anything else. So 15% by array, which is a detailed look at chromosomes, and 40% of intellectual disability or congenital abnormalities are diagnosable on this test called an exome. Now, when I say 2010, that's when they were put into, when they were sort of invented, if you like, out of the human genome technology. But they've only become really standard practice within my hospital, for example, in the last few years, without any accompanying FTE to deal with what this means. Prior to this, these kids, answers weren't found. It was a very expensive process. It was gene by gene, and now we're able to do so much more for families and pregnancies to try and get answers. Okay, so have a look at this. So array, which is that first test here that was invented as part of the Human Genome Project, there's now a Medicare item for microarray. Remembering 15% of anyone who has a congenital abnormality or intellectual disability will be diagnosed on this test. It just wasn't even done before 2012, and now there are about 2,800 of these done per year. Okay, now that has not come with any accompanying clinical FTE to deal with it. So these are new diagnoses or complicated answers that are coming out of this test, no new FTE. It's like a new specialty. It's not the same specialty as it was 20 years ago. And then all of these conditions that are on the screen, this is called Unique, which is a booklet for families. All of these conditions are common and weren't known about before 2010. They've all come out of microarray technology. So commonly now we see kids with these conditions. So this is a missing bit of chromosome 16. This is a missing bit of chromosome 3. They're all got recognizable patterns. So much like, I guess, non-genetic people can recognize Down syndrome, for example, on the array of features that they have. These things are all similar due to different chromosome problems, but with recognizable patterns that happen. So you imagine what that's done to workload in terms of trying to manage children and then the next pregnancy, etc. And a lot of these too, we're still learning about because they're only, relatively new conditions that we're learning about. So these are some other things. So this test exome really didn't start until 2017, and now we're doing over 300 of them a year, and this is the test that's got the 40% diagnostic rate. And that on paper looks great, but these tests also come with a lot of complexity and a lot of variability in terms of what the result means for families. So it's not just a lot more patients, it's a lot more complexity. Now, if you go back to the sort of referrals in our department, for example, so just go back to 2010, there were about 1,200 referrals, and we're now up to nearly 1,800. And as a result, of course, our waiting list has gotten longer and longer. Now, at first glance, you might go, okay, well, 500 patients a year, you can manage that. What's important to note here is that back here, this included children and adults, all within the Women's and Children's Hospital. But the adult genetics unit at the Royal Adelaide started here in 2013. So all adults with genetic disorders, they don't even come to us anymore. And so that's hundreds per year. They've been taken out of the equation and we've gone up by about 500 per year, but we haven't had any consequent change in consultant FTE to deal with it. So really, I feel one of my major roles as a statewide lead here is to make sure that people understand that this is now a new specialty, like radiology was. And there are other examples. Even interventional cardiology was completely new once stents came in, and this is like that. We have these new tools of the trade, but we are not resourced to deal with it. So we do our urgent work urgently, which is pregnancy work, and we do it extremely well. But then the routine patients are waiting 4 years to be seen, because we've got this massive backlog now of people who are being diagnosed by these tests or waiting for these tests and then not coming in. And none of that even takes into account what's coming. And what's coming is genetics for the well. And I want to now talk about that as our third project, which is reproductive carrier screening. So reproductive carrier screening, people may have heard the term, but I think if you hear my words, genetics for the well, what that really refers to is the fact that everybody in the general population are carriers of genetic diseases, usually about 3. They don't affect you, but you're a carrier of that disease. And I just want to expand on that a little bit more. So this has come to sort of significant attention and light because of this beautiful little child, Mackenzie, who's now deceased, who had a condition called spinal muscular atrophy. Her parents, non-medical people, could not believe that they had a 1 in 40 chance of carrying this disease that Mackenzie had, spinal muscular atrophy, like all people, 1 in 40 chance. And they didn't have any mechanism for finding this out. So they lobbied Greg Hunt, who was a friend of Genomics, and really explained the system to him, that this was happening. And Rachel, the mum here, has said it wouldn't have made any difference for what she did with Mackenzie, but she still would have wanted to know in advance that she was sitting on a 1 in 4 risk if that were the case. So they lobbied Greg Hunt. He understood the issue and has put this project, or has funded this project called Mackenzie's Mission, which is free reproductive carrier screening for 10,000 couples for about 1,300 genes, which are associated with 750 rare conditions. And that was about a $10 million project, but out of it came a $500 million investment in genetics research at the federal level, which is unbelievably good. And I was lucky enough to be on the committee involved in this. However, it doesn't at all address the clinical end and how people deal with the counselling that's required for this sort of stuff. Now, the other thing about Mackenzie's Mission is that couples that were identified as both being carriers, so remember I said everyone carries about 3 genetic disorders. Couples, 2 to 3% of all couples are both carriers of the same genetic disorder. So think about cystic fibrosis. 1 in 25 people are carriers of CF, and about 3% of couples are both carriers of CF, which puts them at a 1 in 4 risk of having a child with cystic fibrosis. Mackenzie's Mission and reproductive carrier screening is all about giving people choice and letting them work out what they actually carry, okay? So everyone in the population carries about 3 faulty recessive genes. 2 to 3% of couples both carry a fault in the same gene. 1 in 20 people carry a faulty gene for either spinal muscular atrophy, cystic fibrosis, or Fragile X. And I've told you already what Mackenzie's Mission does. And there are now 2 private companies in South Australia who offer screening for couples for about $700, which is obviously out of reach for some families. But remembering what I told you at the start, where one single gene used to cost about $3,000 to $4,000 to sequence, you can now have close to $1,000 for $700 in total for both couples. And that's because it's all done on a massive scale in big labs. This is just a screenshot of the diseases. There's a whole lot of things that people wouldn't have heard about there, and there's hundreds more that are on the list. I just, literally screenshotted a few, but they're all things that people have a right to know about if they want to. And and Mackenzie's Mission is doing it for free. And as I said, you can pay to have it done, but we feel that this is going to get an MBS item attached to it, which is going to open it up to the well. But my department is going to be the department that is going to look after these couples and manage them through their decision making. And we have had 0 extra resource to deal with this whole thing. So we have a working party that's looking at this and ways that we can help prepare for this. Already, MBS has funded the 3 diseases that I mentioned here: spinal muscular atrophy, cystic fibrosis, and Fragile X. So there's an MBS item now for carrier screening for couples where it's free to get this done. That starts next year. And that in itself has no genetic counselling support to it at all. We're expected to do that in a hospital that's looking after kids with sick genetic diseases. And you know, we're going to have to come up with a solution to this, because it's a wonderful thing for people to have this choice, but no one's really thought through the workforce. So I feel my work won't be done as statewide lead until this is sorted out, because we need to be prepared for it. All right, so happy to take questions. I think that's my time up in time, which is good. We've got a couple of contact points here, and I can be contacted at the Women's and Children's Hospital if anyone's got any extra questions about any of that.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you for a really interesting presentation on the work of the statewide clinical network. And I know, as a clinician, having worked with you at the Women's and Children's over a number of years, there is so much more to you, the work of genetics and the unit at the Women's and Children's, than you've been able to go into today.